Hey guys, and welcome back to Hoosier Hardware, and today we're taking a look at a pre-built gaming PC, or actually not even a gaming PC, just a pre-built PC that, at least in theory, could be a gaming PC, but because of the decisions of HP in their infinite wisdom, this PC is, at least for the most part, a dead-end system, and I just hate it so much because there's so much potential on the spec sheet, and it's let down purely by proprietary crap that HP wants to pull. So let's talk about that after a word from today's video sponsor, and that would be the Coldest water, which is a water bottle company that gives you what it says, the coldest water. And yeah, these insulated bottles are quite nice. They have a great texture to them. They have some nice rubber to help you get a hold of them and not have them slip all over the place. Or if your hands are slippery from maybe doing dishes or something, then you can actually still open them because they're very grippy. But regardless, see those links in the video description down below. There's a running giveaway where you can just keep entering for a chance to win one of these water bottles. They come in several different colors and sizes. There's also an HH10 code down below for you to save 10% on any purchase of said water bottles. So check out those links in the description down below for more information. Nothing makes me furious like pre-built gaming PCs in the afternoon, but here we go. So a little bit on this system, some of my notes here, the advantages of this HP Pavilion, which, just so you're aware, I got this thing from Costco actually online for under $500. It was on special for like $100 off or something, and the spec sheet is actually really encouraging for this system. First and foremost, you have a Ryzen 5 4600G, which is a fantastic APU that I wish was available on the open market to the DIY market and not just OEMs, because this is 6 cores, 12 threads on the CPU side, and this is the Zen 2 architecture, so it'd be very similar to something like a Ryzen 3600, but then it also has onboard graphics that are strong enough with these Radeon graphics to power something like Overwatch at 1080p, or most esports titles that you can basically play online in competitive settings. This thing will actually run at least reasonable frame rates. Now, obviously 60 FPS isn't exactly the cream of the crop when it comes to competitive gameplay, but at least it gets you up and running. I just saw a special the other day, I think it was on Newegg, for the DDR4 variant of a GT 1030 for something like $150 or something like that. So any graphics that can let you play any game right now, that's a good thing. And it's at a reasonable price, so even better. And again, on paper, a system like this is perfect because it lets you get up and running playing some retro games, playing maybe some easier to run modern games, and certainly running esports titles. It lets you get up and running with those games and lets you get started down that PC gaming path. And then for those hard to run games like Cyberpunk or other AAA demanding games, maybe Red Dead Redemption 2 for instance, you can just sort of wait on while you're playing your esports titles and retro games, and then when GPUs are available, in theory, you could just pick one of those GPUs up and then slap it in this system, and you would have yourself an extremely competent gaming rig. But that's where it all falls apart. Now, before I get into the drawbacks that HP threw in the way of this system and what makes it really a bad system to pick up if you're looking for PC gaming, I do want to mention the other specs beyond the 4600G. This thing does have 12 gigabytes of DDR4 memory that comes in a 4 gig stick and an 8 gig stick within the 2 DIMMs the motherboard supports. So if you wanted to upgrade to like 16 gigabytes, for instance, you'd have to remove that 4 gig stick and put in an 8 gig stick. And then the storage configuration I think is actually really nice on this system, where you get a 256 gigabyte SSD with a 1 terabyte hard drive for a lot of your mass media needs, or just the games that you can't fit on the 256 gigabyte SSD. And it is worth noting, in games like Overwatch, which I did test this PC with a couple games, but in Overwatch the frame rate was okay, and you know, it was fine. It was what you would expect from integrated graphics from something like the 4600G. The Radeon graphics on this APU aren't really meant to be full-fledged gaming, but they do allow you to play games like Overwatch, or Fortnite is another game that I tested that I didn't actually record the gameplay for, but Fortnite is perfectly playable with this PC. But if you get up to the AAA games like Red Dead Redemption 2 or presumably Cyberpunk Cyberpunk would be the exact same way, and Hitman 3 was the same way as well. It's really not a playable experience with those AAA titles, so you're really sticking to, with the 4600G integrated graphics, you're really just going to be sticking to esports titles and retro games, and really not much that's very demanding at all. Now, I'll grab some B-roll so you can see this a little bit better, but the majority of the drawbacks of this system centers around the power supply situation. So first and foremost, the mounting of the power supply is not a standard ATX setup. Now, based on what I'm seeing inside the case and on the outside of the case, if you really wanted to fit an ATX power supply in this system, you could make it work. You might have to cut out some of the back plate here to get the power connector for, depending on what power supply you're planning on using, to actually connect to the cord to the wall. You might not have this piece of metal that my hand is on here. You might have to cut that out completely. And then on the inside of the case, you might have to take a hammer to it to flatten some of it out to make the power supply actually sit down. But you could probably make a standard ATX power supply work just fine. The other issue, though, is the actual power connectors on the motherboard, and this is the bigger problem that I have with this system. It does have an EPS connector that's the standard 4-pin that we would expect from a power supply, but then instead of a 24-pin ATX mainboard connector, you just have another 4-pin connector, and then there's this weird sort of like 4-pin connector on a header that has 7 pins available. It's proprietary. And I hate this because the power supplies that are online secondary, like on eBay, I haven't been able to find anything that's a higher wattage than the 180 watts included with this system that actually is affordable and reasonable. Like the ones that I found that are 400 watts that might work in this system, they're like $150 on the secondhand market, and on the HP website, I haven't really been able to find anything as far as power supplies go that are actually a reasonable price. And for adapters, which normally on Amazon or on eBay, you can find adapters for power supplies to adapt a normal standard power supply to a motherboard like this, I haven't actually been able to find an adapter that works with this motherboard, with this 4-pin and 4-pin and then other 4-pin connector. I haven't found that adapter. So if you do happen to stumble across one of these power adapters for specifically these types of Pavilions, make sure to give us that link in the comments because I'd be very interested in taking a look at that. But the power supply is extremely limiting with what you can do with this system because you can't pull the motherboard and put it into a different system without using this power supply. So the motherboard is effectively useless. The case is effectively useless because of the way the power supply mounts in it, and it doesn't support normal power supplies, and the power supply is useless. So if your intent was to buy a system like this and then upgrade it down the road, it's pretty much useless for that. Now, it is worth mentioning, you do have a little bit of power overhead. I saw in gaming, for the most part, only over 50 watts, about 50 to 60 watts was being used from the wall, and that's because the CPU side of this APU is really not doing a lot because the GPU is so outmatched by the 6 cores and 12 threads on it that the CPU side of this APU isn't really doing a lot in game. Now, if I did hit it with a Cinebench R23 load, I did see that the power draw from the wall was more like 90 watts, so you do have a little bit of overhead with the 180 watt power supply. So if you're just looking to put something like maybe a GTX 1650, a GT 1030 in this system, that would work just fine. But this CPU, this Ryzen 4600G, would be a great pairing with something like a GTX 1080 or a 1080 Ti or a 1070 or a 1660 Ti or a 3060, you know, some of these newer cards that can definitely push a lot more frames. This CPU would be a great pairing for, but the system doesn't make sense as an upgradable system because even if you transplant some of the components you can take with it, the RAM, the CPU, the storage, you're losing out on so much else. You're just better off using the brand new market and just buying yourself a Ryzen 3600, getting a custom case, or just buying a completely different pre-built that may run a little bit more, but at least you can upgrade the system freely because it uses standard parts. Okay, so that was a little bit long-winded, but point being, this HP system, it has so much potential. Had HP made different decisions with how to treat the 4600G and with the components in the power department and how the power supply connects to the motherboard, this could have been a really awesome entry-level, potentially gaming system, or at least starter gaming system that you can upgrade very easily. But instead, HP nuked it because either they're trying to protect the market of their other gaming desktops that are a little bit more expensive, they just want to be jerks, or possibly a little bit of both. But regardless, a lot of potential here, and it falls flat on its face because of proprietary crap that HP did that, from a consumer side of things, just doesn't make any sense. But of course, this is where I want to hear from you guys. What do you think about pre-builts like this that use proprietary connectors really just to put roadblocks in an upgrader's path? Let me know all your thoughts in those comments down below. And of course, if you like the video, give it a like, share, subscribe, comment. All those things are very helpful for the channel. You can follow me both on Instagram and on Twitter at Hoosier Hardware. And as always, I'll let YouTube queue up a couple more videos for my channel for you to watch. I'm Shane with Hoosier Hardware, and I'll see you guys in the next video.